Okay, we're recording. This is Dr. John Bush with Dennis Mitchelson. He's my number one guy, only one that wants to put up with me. He's drank about 20 cups of coffee. If you look at his picture, he's ready to roll. Me too. My robotic side is in. I've got some data on snaps and using predictions, and this is just beta testing. I was bored. I wanted to see things. Dennis was up in Indianapolis. I don't know what he was doing up there, causing trouble, in and out of jail. And anyway,
Hey,
I was,
somebody had to compete.
yeah,
Somebody had to compete for that starting quarterback job. And obviously, since I didn't make the flight to Seattle,
yeah,
I didn't make the cut.
yeah,
So
yeah. So anyway, let me start with the data here, and I'll try to. I don't know if I'll post this or not, but anyway, team snaps early versus late. I wanted to look at two sections of the season, first 7 weeks, the next seven. That's why after week 14, it's kind of symmetrical. So I divided the 32 teams into three buckets, three groups, based on their team snap averages. Okay, that's what the team did in total, right? And so there were those that were high, average, and low. High team average snaps were in the top 20%, low was in the bottom, and average was the rest. So again, this concept of kind of above and below the whiskers of the box and whiskers in the box plot there and figuring that out. So the extremes, I think, tell us more than the average. And the extremes give us opportunities to maybe look at things a little different. People assume everything's the same, and this concept says maybe not. I look at the high, the low, and the average. And then of those team buckets, the teams that were in each bucket, I looked at their weeks 8 to 14. So using weeks 1 to 7, divide them into three buckets, and then look at their weeks 8 to 14 and figure out what group they go in and calculate then the 7 weeks of snaps, actually develop three kind of columns there of all the snaps of those teams in each one, and as an aggregate then perform an analysis of variance, and if significant do the post hoc, not turkey, Tukey test, Tukey, and to the group means. In other words, is there a significant difference based on what bucket the teams found themselves in week 1 to 7? In other words, a predictive nature. Could we have known early in the season how things might be later in the season? So this helps in trades, tie breaking, streaming situations. And again, this is just beta. This is 1 year. I need to go back previous years and gather more samples here. So, Dennis, that is, and this may or may not turn out to be a poster, but for right now, this is what I've done. I'll stop if you want to comment on the methodology or any things that hit you when you're. And this first time Dennis has seen this. I teased him a little bit, but
yes, you did. Yeah, I when I look at this and ever whenever you're doing an analysis like this, I really like this top 20, bottom 20 concept because we want to know whether the extremes make a difference versus the median. And I like that breakdown. And I also, the only concern I have is when you have a situation where you're looking at the first 7 weeks and the next 7 weeks,
mhm,
injuries can be
mhm,
kind of a random distribution.
Mhm.
So we've got to be very careful when we look at this data to understand that a lot of the things that you see in the data can be changed because of an injury or two and can lead to different results this year than the exact same roster would produce in another year. But I really like breaking it down top 20 and top and bottom 20. And I also like using the scientific method to break the data down because the great thing about doing the statistical testing is you remove as much personal bias as
Right.
possible. And that's what we should always be aiming for because it's very easy to get into bad habits when it comes to using statistics in fantasy football.
So when I was looking at team level snaps, I understood the injury. And this is not me saying there's not something to consider, there is. I assumed that if player one was gone, that whoever was stepping up would, the snaps potentially would be nearly the same. It's not the scoring, right? I mean, if CD Lamb is out, I just assume whoever Flournoy, whoever jumps in gets the same snaps. It's just then does he get the same points? We're measuring activity. We're not measuring the success of activity. So I think at this level, it's I think there's a little bit safer because we're not measuring touchdowns and receptions, and yards. We're just measuring potential. This is the lowest level for volume. So this is not to expand this discussion. But that was part of my thinking because if you use points and touchdowns, to me, that is a little bit trickier because touchdowns can be fluky, as we know. Weird things can happen, penalties, and one player could get in the end zone and touchdown, but there's a penalty, then another player collects, right? A running back collects, a wide receiver misses. So the fate of scoring can be wonky, you know.
Yes.
But I thought snaps, and again, this is just thinking that a team has a timing to it, per second, and a rhythm. And so I thought snaps would be a little bit more likely to not have to worry so much about injuries in the sense that if Jacobs doesn't go, Emmanuel Wilson's, a lot of the snaps he'll get are not going to be so wacky versus what Jacobs was getting. In other words, I don't perceive that somehow if Jacobs is out, the running backs as a whole somehow change a lot. It could be higher, right? To compensate, could be lower, could be the same. So I think when people are judging scoring and PPR points, you're right that their injury plays a role. And I know in the MVP, you've tracked that. So that is not to poo poo your idea because that is what we need. We need groups of people approaching this research and reminding us about some things, right? It's peer review. And so the one reason I like to keep Dennis, in the dark a little bit because I get that feedback and that's
Yes.
of interest. But anyway, that was my point of starting with snaps.
Yeah, and I think that's the right place to start because what we're concerned about is chasing volume. And
Yes.
the first step in understanding volume
Mm-hmm.
is understanding who's on the field.
Right.
And when I say that even the snap distribution could be different, let's say a great running back like Jonathan Taylor, who has
Mm-hmm.
been getting a very high level of the snaps
Right.
and an even higher level of the usage.
Right.
But let's say he goes out. I don't believe that the Colts have one guy that would even be close to replacing both of his roles.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the snap percentages
For the
and the
players,
distribution for the players could change
but this
quite a
is
bit.
measuring above that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So
Now
I'm
this is
not measuring the distribution. I'm measuring the whole team. And
right.
then I'm getting into the positions. I'm going to do positional analysis as well, Dennis.
Perfect.
Running backs, tight ends, wide receivers. So again, my thinking would be the overall, even if it's four people replacing Taylor, that together they're going to gather enough snap activity because their rhythm and the practice has been based on, whatever their game plan. We're going to run a lot more this week against Team X, Team Y, that kind of thing, or less. So I'm hoping that's not an issue, but anything like that deserves to be, at least if I had a big bulletin board, that would be issues, right? I mean, it's you could call it strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats to the data, right? It's the SWOT
Yes.
analysis that business folks use. We
Yes.
can do it for projects, and that is something that would be a threat to our interpretation. So I would put that out there with a question mark, and so at least we're looking at it. And but usually when you do the ANOVA and you do if significant a Tukey is it's looking past that, regardless of how it got there,
Right. Right.
you're looking and it changes or doesn't change. So I'm hoping between having the higher level snaps, not player percentages or player touchdowns, which could be really wacky.
Oh yeah.
I'm guessing, Dennis, I've never done, are there touchdown magnets? I mean, every year we find those and we draft, they get a lot of attention. But over 10 years, is there something to that? In other words, are there more touchdown hogs and wide receivers over the last 10 years versus running backs versus tight ends?
Good
Those
question.
kind of questions remain.
Great questions.
It is a
Great
great question.
questions.
Where's the
Yes.
where's the where are the touchdown hogs? And is it team level? Is it position level? Player level? So anyway, this is the kind of data, and people saying, "Well, how come we hadn't seen this?" Because you don't want it. I understand the two or three that are listening to us, as they do, but the majority in your league, folks, they could care less. They just, give me the fire this week, help me get in next week's playoff, that they could care less about this. And I'm a research based person. And to me, this what inspires my thinking the whole season. I mean, it's, people talk about the grind. There is no grind. It's,
Oh
it's a
no.
puzzle
Yes.
and whatnot. So anyway, that was my editorial on that. But again, Dennis, I would put that under threats.
Yeah, and I think that's the right way to look at it is to always understand every time you're looking at this data,
Mhm.
at any kind of data,
Right.
you always have to understand that there are some flukiness. There's some flukiness to the data and especially this is a small distribution. We're taking a look at 7 weeks versus 7 weeks.
Yeah.
So we know
And
that
here it is too on the
yeah,
screen.
yeah, and but these kinds of analysis, that this sort of research is so important because even if it rules out something as being useful,
That's
that's
still a
successful.
gain. That's a gain. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
this
don't
I'm
have the
fascinated.
dog in this fight, whichever way it goes.
No, and I don't know which way. Like again, weather forecasting brain is always looking for the ways that the model can trick us, the data can trick us. And so when you see a piece of data, if you are a good weather forecaster, every piece of data you look at will not change your mind, but it will make you curious of to see how this piece fits with the pattern. And then there comes a point where the pattern is so overwhelming that it tells you, okay, this is legit.
Sports, the one thing that unites people.
Sorry.
So that's the way I look at data in a different way, because I'm always a skeptic with every piece of data. And that's why when we do these statistical tests, it's so important because
it takes your opinion out.
Correct.
It's
It lets
mathematical.
you know if there is something here. And then, like everything else, if it shows you that there is something unique, it doesn't usually mean here's the answer. It just means you're on the right path to finding an answer.
Right. So right here, what you're looking at is the first 7 weeks, the average of the team in the next 7 weeks. Green, these are the average 7 weeks that are in the top 20%. And I also show you the weeks that the team was in the top 20%. Red is the bottom 20%. So one could have done this by counting the weeks. I didn't. You could come back and do that. I just looked at the 7 weeks and asked the question then, what about the next seven? So Baltimore, Vegas, Miami, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Tennessee, first 7 weeks were in the bottom 20%. If I would have known that, would that have changed Lamar Jackson? Would that have changed Hurts a little bit? I'm just saying this gives us some thinking versus Carolina, Cleveland, believe it or not, Denver, Jacksonville, the Giants, San Francisco have been in the top. So it's something to think about, and there's no staining the team name. It is in the average bucket. And then here is the next 7 weeks. You can see what's going on. So if you're just curious about the last 2 or 3 weeks, you can see what's up. Dallas has been on a roll, that kind of thing. Baltimore last week did something it hadn't done since week 6. It was in the top 20% there. That was kind of interesting. But anyway, there that is. And so this is another way visually to look at. I love these three-way graphs here. So I look at the top seven, first 7 weeks, next seven, and the season average. Those three columns. And I don't care about that advertisement. Average of team snaps is in the bar, and the red dot is the average snaps weeks 1 to 7. The green bar is 8 to 14. And you can just look at the pattern. I went ahead and highlighted the lower teams, weaker teams, the low snap teams, and you can just kind of see. So some teams, there's a spread between, or let's call it the difference between the teams and what they were doing. Some teams were pretty much consistent, right on top. So the dots, the closer they are, it's the same. The further they are, something was different. So one might even come back to this data and ask the question, why was Atlanta good early and worse late, right? But Baltimore was, you know, so Atlanta was good early, bad late. Baltimore flipped. So exactly opposite that pattern. So there's some patterns there to investigate. I got too much to do. I need interns. So anyway, what I did going back, Dennis, is I would took my first bucket, the high, and and that was Carolina, and I took 61, 58, etc., all the way to week 14, which is zero. Put that into the first bucket. Then I took Cleveland, took those into the bucket. So I didn't take the average, Dennis. I actually looked at the weekly snap average for the team. So I used the average first 7 weeks to then decide what teams to grab, but individually up to 7 pieces of data, the weekly average. So I did that with Jacksonville, the Giants, and San Francisco. So that is called be the high, and then Baltimore, etc., the Vegas, etc., are the low. So when you look at that data, descriptive stats of our treatments, high, average, and low, 36, 119, 39 data points. And long story short, the median is 63, 65, 61. And you're thinking, well, that seems kind of interesting that high and average is higher than the high, but higher than the low. And so the question with this data, is this real? Is this random? Is there any difference? And you do this and it is different. The p-value, this right here, is below 0.5. So those differences, the chance that they are not real is less than 5%, actually 4.7%. So beforehand, we say 5%, so that's a pretty high standard. So 95% confidence that, the low is the low. So it implies something's happening here, that's real. And if you think 7 weeks and you're losing, say, 6 snaps per game, so that's 35 snaps. That's a lot of missed opportunity low teams are showing versus an average or maybe even the high, say 4 snaps times 28. So there's something there. So the potential is lowest with the low team, which is what I would think. When we look at Tukey, because this is significant, then we investigate where it is significant. And you might think, well, what happens if this number is above 0.05? Then we say no difference. Even though there is a difference, right? We see that there's differences. We assume this is by random chance. This says it's not by random chance. Okay? So we can probably hang our hat on this low. It's suspicious. And so what we see, and it's really interesting how this arrived at this, the high group versus the average, no difference. And that's probably 63, 65. That's probably not surprising. High versus low was insignificant, but average versus low was different. So the low was, if you compared to the average, was different. So it didn't quite turn out. You would have hoped that the high and the average would have been both higher and more snaps than the low, but we can't say that. This data says, nope, it's only the average. So there is some, I think at the team level, what I think is coming out of the gate, I'm wondering is there, and again, this is just me speculating about why the high wasn't greater significantly than the low. Maybe there is some variation in those top 20% that came back to earth a little bit. But what interests me is if you were low, you probably stayed low, which again, does that mean, what does that mean? Does that mean positionally low in all positions, one or two positions, players, quarterbacks? I mean, there's something that should warn you, Dennis, and I'm hoping that if I look at year to year, that next draft season we could be a little suspicious about, year to year. Is there something year to year, snap wise, that can tell us something so we can break ties or maybe even avoid, the players that don't have enough value to compensate for some issue? So I'm going to stop there and let you comment on the data or the results.
Yeah, and I think what this really shows us is the group that we need to be really paying attention to from a negative standpoint are the low volume guys.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think it through, that makes a lot of sense.
And that's Baltimore, Vegas, Miami, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Tennessee. So, Dennis, theoretically, about week 6 or 7, if we hadn't already got some alarm bells, we can use this next year, since there is something happening, to be suspicious on trading or breaking ties in the next, going even into the playoffs here. A little bit, we're concerned about Lamar, and now that I look back, I think there was some signal. I know he was hurt, but even early first couple weeks, something wasn't clicking here.
What I'm interested to see is if Baltimore last season ended up in this low position at any point.
Right.
If so, then that was a reason to be concerned. And what I love about this concept is that we're looking at the extremes. So we're looking 20% is an extreme. And, I already noticed that we've got Miami.
Yep.
Could you imagine what Ashane would be doing if he wasn't in that low category?
If he was in Jacksonville or
so
Carolina.
So another way of using this data is to say, okay, this explains why certain players underperformed. But if this was something that has been a trend over the last few years, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is a highly efficient player, but it means if that regression might be more likely to attack him to the low side.
Because, and remember, we can comment on the running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. I've done that data.
Yeah,
I have the answers.
And a classic player that shows up on this list is AJ Brown, because when I look at AJ Brown's data, I look at his opportunities, his MVP score compared to volume, if you will.
Yeah.
And it was alarming, like high MVP, but the data suggested that maybe this isn't repeatable based on volume. Like he wasn't getting the extreme volume that you expect from a guy. He was just highly, highly efficient. And it made me concerned. And that's why I don't have as much of AJ Brown in redraft this year, is because I was concerned about that. Can you continue that data? Can you be in a low volume offense and continue to be so efficient? And I'm not sure what the answer is to that, but like everything in the data is, I'm looking for flags. I'm looking for red flags. And I'm especially looking for red flags on great players
Yeah.
because I don't want to pay a premium price for a guy that might be an underachiever. And that's just another red flag. But this data, I can see maybe this data is used in that same way, as it's not, okay, I'm going to eliminate all the players from this bottom 20% team, but it's more of a, I'm going to demand that I get them at a good price.
Yeah.
And that might be one of the practical uses of this data.
Well,
I'm very
obviously,
intrigued.
yeah, I'm hoping that's the case, Dennis. I want us to, I mean, it's all about draft value, capital, and how we distribute it. And this makes us smarter, right? That's the whole point of this, folks, is, I, I, if you're thinking, well, who cares because it's week 15 and la 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 la. I understand this is checkers this season. I'm trying to play chess for my whole career playing fantasy. So this is part of that research.
But
This is what's driving me
but
to
but
learn
even
things.
but even for this year's playoffs,
It, it's
if
it's
I
concerning about Baltimore. Yes.
it might be a decision on start sit with some players depending on your options.
Yeah.
And I have been sitting Lamar for Matthew Stafford in one of my key leagues
Yeah.
because I've been concerned about the output of the team Baltimore, and now it makes sense. They are an underachiever.
Something's going on. So anyway, Dennis, I then broke it into positions, RBs, WRs, tight ends. I didn't do quarterbacks. Again, the same method here. So this is the methodology. And, on a poster, folks, if you do make it to the expo, I try to at least give a thumbnail of how I did the methods. In a scientific poster, you have an abstract, you have the methods, you have the results, and you have your speculations and conclusions. And that is the format of a poster. If you want to do a poster, talk to Dennis and I, and we're going to be banging that drum to try to see if we can get some folks out of the woodwork here a little bit. I don't know. Anyway, Dennis, let's start with running backs. Uh, Here we go. This is running backs. And look at Baltimore is in the low here, Dennis. Buffalo's in the low. Denver, Houston, the Jets, and Washington are all low RB snaps first 7 weeks. Then you can look at the next 7. And Buffalo continues to be, sad. So Baltimore got a little better, but they didn't get in the high. They stayed in average on weeks 8 to 14. But anyway, we're going to look at that. And you can look at Indianapolis. You can see the second. I can see where Jonathan Taylor took off weeks 9 and 10, probably, and week 13 probably did well. And so we start speculating about then running backs, not players. We're just asking the question about the running backs. Here's that same plot, first 7, next 7, and average. And I highlighted the low teams, including poor Green Bay here. It's sad, and then the high teams, and then the distribution of the week. Some teams are spot on next to each other. Look at Arizona. What a gap. They have improved so much, uh, compared to, say, Atlanta, which has been the same, which is high, by the way, up there. Pretty good. Bijan, pretty good. Others, Algier. But anyway, this is trying to let us look at the season of the running back and speculate things. And I added some extra data, average difference from late to early. Arizona number one, Chargers, Indianapolis, Chicago, New England, and then the Giants have all improved in the last 7 weeks versus their early part. And the decliners, look at Seattle, look at Minnesota, Cleveland, San Francisco, believe it or not. I think CMC's being, believe it or not, being underused. Miami, look at A-Shane. There's that story, Dennis. The song continues for him. Can you imagine him on an Arizona team or Chargers? Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Kamara's been pretty much, they've been trying to struggle to keep that going. So now this looks at the differences, what's happened recently, who's ascending, who's declining. So I think that's some pretty good overall data, and we'll get to the stats here, but I'll break it and let you comment on any of this.
So there's a couple of ways that this data can be a little bit skewed. There are some teams that run more 2 RB sets than other teams. So, we see a real fullback in the game, or in the case of Atlanta, they've had quite a few times this year where both Algier and Bijan Robinson are on the field at the same time. So that can be interesting. And again, doesn't mean that it takes the data away. What we see with Atlanta is they've been very consistent with that. We've seen other teams that have been incredibly consistent with whatever they are doing. And that is very important to know as well. Very fascinating to see how this data breaks down, and also interesting to see that the spread with some teams and the spread overall is much greater at running back than it is for the teams as a whole, which makes sense. Different positions will be skewed in different ways, but this is very fascinating to see who the more heavy volume teams have been here, especially at the running back position, and how it's changed. That's a big significant change. CMC is sort of slowed down. If you look at the performance, the highs of his performances all came early in the season. Later in the season, he has not been still great, but he's
negative,
not,
Dennis. Means that he must have been high.
Yes.
Seasons weeks 1 to 7.
Exactly. And there's 2 ways to get in that low category. You can be
just low to be low, or a change that way.
The change being low is very significant because that coincides with what we've seen on the field. And again, highly efficient player still. So he's getting his points. But early in the season, he was getting more chances to get those points, which is quite interesting.
Here's the 3 buckets: high RB teams, average, and low again snaps. Look at the averages now. This is interesting. 29, 25, 21. That is what I would have expected the data to look. In other words, if there's reality, Dennis, I would expect a stair step down. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And is this random or is this real? And I'll answer that in a second. And there's a lot of other data, folks, but just look at the mean. And I'm telling you, 9 snaps more per running back group per week versus low RBs. Dennis, over 7, a 60-something snaps. That's almost a game. That, to me, that struck me as like, wow. So I think there's secrets here, folks. Again, as Dennis said, maybe it's fullbacks. I mean, but it's just, folks, you got to have a map and it's got to have some direction. This is intriguing and it shows me a direction. Is this real? Oh, yeah. Oh,
Wow.
yeah. Yeah. Folks, this is point 0.7 zeros 13382. Oh yeah, it's real. I mean, that's a strong, that F stat. That's strong medicine here, Dennis. And lo and behold, there are differences as a stair step, and it's significant. So within a year, it's significant. That means it is predictive overall. And after 7 weeks, that means we've got a direction to consider for the next seven. So if I'm in Dynasty, trading and jettisoning players, and, if you're already worried about some older players, this might inspire your trading and people, if you knew first 7 weeks this may give you a little bit of a window that people are normally, they usually just what happened last week, here's your window. They'll say it. And this removes that, which can fluctuate to more of a significant window that nobody except the few of us with secret stuff here, Dennis, would have. So trades, tiebreakers, in a flex, that second RB, do you really want that RB this time, or that there's an injury and a replacement in a low team situation? How good is that? And by the way, notice the Chargers with Vidal and Hampton. That's that question. When I saw that, Dennis, I'm like, okay, that is a significant question for us to solve this way, or try to. When you see something like, and Bam Knight versus Carter, I think we know it's Bam Knight, but DeMarcado might be coming back. So just, I mean, the the good news is if you can figure it out, you have opportunity possibility. I mean, we have to look at DAPS and all these other stuff, but it sets potential table for what we can get deep. In other words, you start somewhere. What I don't like is people don't have a place to start. They just, well, last week they did this or this. This gives you a starting point that's a lot more firmer because it's statistically significant. I'll stop here for running backs. And we can look at any of the teams you're curious about, Dennis, to see who's high, low, and average if you want to review that.
So what I'm really interested to see, Professor, did any teams go from high all the way down to low, or from low all the way up to
So
high?
the extreme of the extremes.
So did the extremes change from one extreme to the
So
next? And I don't
Atlanta
see it.
stayed high and high. Cincinnati stayed high to average. Rams stayed high to average. New Orleans high to average. San Francisco high to high. In Tampa Bay high to average. So nobody went extremely from one to the other. The low teams, Buffalo low to low, Denver low to low, Houston low to low, poor Woody. Jets low to average, Washington low to average. Nobody did what you were wanting to find.
And
Nobody was extremes.
no.
You knew. I think
I
there was a thing.
I
Atlanta.
had a feeling. I
Yeah.
had a feeling that that was the case because in almost everything that we have done with data and fantasy football, whether it's defensive strengths, whatever it is, you very seldom see a team, even from year to year, go from extreme to extreme. They always have to seem to pass through that middle zone. And that makes so much sense from a philosophical sense. If you're thinking, this is the worst 20, it's not likely to go up to the best 20 and vice versa. But I wanted to double check that,
Yeah.
because knowing that is a powerful, powerful predictive tool for those really bad teams. So the teams that are low, I'm like, the best you're going to be is average.
Yes.
The
At best
the high volume teams, the worst you're going to be
is
average. So it lets you go into things with an understanding that if I see these guys down low, I'm going to be a little cautious, because the way I look at it, if your opportunity is less,
Yeah.
you have to be so efficient in your production
Right.
to be above median. And that's not what I want. And look at a case in point here. Two of the rookie running backs who I really liked this year are stuck on low volume teams. RJ Harvey with Denver, and Woody Marks with Houston.
So does that make them an interesting potential value next year? That's the question, folks. We're trying to work. I know it's week 15. Give me the damn, show me who's, tell me who's going to win. I understand, but there's more to it. It can't be just you pop up and get the answer and pop back down. We're not about that scene. We're thinking next year.
Yeah, but I'm also thinking for the playoffs, because
Yeah.
I'm in a situation. I'm in a situation in a guillotine league where I've got some really good running backs to choose from.
Yeah.
But do I want to lean into the guys that are the higher volume guys instead of taking a chance on the low volume guys? James Cook is one of my guys on my guillotine team. I'm at this point, I'm very tempted to pass him over for another guy, because I'm looking at a situation where you're talking elite. Okay. I'm not talking replacing James Cook with, Tony Pollard. Okay.
Right.
I'm talking about replacing James Cook with a Derrick Henry or a Kyron Williams.
Right.
Those are the decisions that I'm making. And when I see the green for the Rams, I'm also reminded, yes, but he also split some snaps now with Blake Corum, whereas Cook doesn't split as much with Johnson and Davis. So you got to look at this data as a whole. But what I'm saying is, James Cook and Bijan Robinson have both been terrific producers. But if I had to decide between the two on who I have more faith in week 15, just based on this data, I'm leaning into Bijan every day of the week. And so that's just based on getting opportunities.
And this is a little different, folks. This is just something, since I had it, I could grab it, that I haven't statistically tested any of these differences. I just made note for my thinking. And I do like the Tyrone Tracy. That's interesting. If you can solve the Henderson and Stevenson riddle. Chicago, you got Swift and Mundanjai. Indianapolis is Taylor all the way. And boy, I'd love somebody to say we're going to let Vidal get that hot hand. I wish I could know. And I think Bam Knight has an opportunity. Things have been going well. Here's where things have been getting a little lean. So I'm not saying anything other than look at Tampa Bay. Poor Bucky. You feel like he's never gotten the full bite of the apple this
Oh yeah,
season.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I mean,
But but
you know,
again, but again, if we check this data and we see that Tampa was never in this bad area last year,
yeah,
okay, and we know Bucky's healthy going into next season, and if there's a discount to be had,
yeah,
we have reasons to lean into that
yeah. You
discount.
can use positive and you can use negative data. In other words, just knowing this versus people just think it's a flat line, or people just
No,
look at
no,
week 16 and 17 and that's all they remember.
yes.
So anyway, here is tight ends, same data.
Another way I'm interested, before you get into the tight ends, another
Sure.
way I'm interested in grading this data
Yeah.
is looking at green versus red weeks as a total.
Yeah.
And I
You
think
could do
that
that.
will be another tool
Hmm.
that will really be successful, because what it also does is it illuminates some of those game script weeks where if a
I mean,
team
you
just,
could overlay the DAPs on top of
yeah,
that too, Dennis.
yeah, yes. If a team just gets off to a lousy start, maybe the game script means less running back snaps for this particular week. But again, the data is the fact that the data is significant.
Yes.
It now lets you know that this is data that we can use
In season.
in season for
And maybe,
important things.
yeah.
And I
Well,
love that. Whenever a data set shows up as being significant, I mean, look at Buffalo at running backs. Not a single week in the green. That's
nope.
concerning to me.
Nope.
That's concerning to me going into the fantasy football finals. I That gets me nervous. Versus look at Detroit,
Look
a
at
team
Chicago,
that's
Dennis, the double teaming last three
yeah.
weeks.
Oh yeah. And you get away with playing both of them right now,
Well,
depending on
maybe
what the
that
defense is.
tells you that signals a play them both streak.
Yeah, because either way you go, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And then I look at Detroit. So Detroit hasn't really, you know, clipped the bell in either 7 week period. But look at the green weeks they've had. They had 3
3 and 3.
green weeks and 3 green weeks. That tells me something there. I'm
They're a
like,
+4 for the season. If you
yeah.
subtract the two negatives, you could even grade them like that, Dennis.
And
And
I'm
then, like I said, I know we just don't have time, but if we
yeah.
could have the VP of the running backs, all of them, the team level
Oh yeah.
MVP, the
Yes.
position level MVP, you could stack that on top the opportunities and see what the ratio is. And of course, then strength of schedule, folks. I would look back. I don't know if you're paying for data, but look at people's predictions. Just did somebody, you know, tell us about Cincinnati or Denver or Houston or the Rams? I mean, did somebody illuminate those 7 weeks? It was going to be easy. Look at Cincinnati, a 4, that
And
kind of thing. Is
is there
yeah,
is there a home away bias for some teams
home
that
away by
shows up
we
in this
you could
data?
come back,
Yeah.
print this, Dennis, and circle home, and you could
Yes.
you
Yes.
could do that.
This is
There's a lot I
fascinating
can do
stuff.
with
There's
this.
so much now that the data has been collected.
Yep,
And the data is shown to be significant.
yep.
Then the data starts becoming really
And like I
useful.
said, the next thing is player level. Next thing is year to year
Yes. Yes.
predictability. Is that
Yes.
significant? In other words, is Denver fated next year to still have some lower opportunities for their, or if Harvey's there, maybe he's a discount or maybe he's thought of too well. I don't know.
Yeah, and this is the key: is the data is going to be used at different places in the ADP.
Yes.
Like a guy who's going in the first 2 rounds,
Yeah.
I want him to be green as much as possible.
Yeah.
Like I want no
If
red
I'm going to
flags.
draft Puka, I want to see this for RBs. I mean, for
Yes,
WRs.
for WRs. I do not want to see any red flags for my top drafted guys.
And we'll have this to study because I'll
love it.
Dennis, I'll do this for the whole season. I'll do so. I'll have this as our secret data stuff.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So tight ends, I'll step it up a little bit. Did I do WRs? No, tight ends. Let's see. Tight ends. Here are the highs and the lows: Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, Kansas City, New England, and the Jets are the high. The Cincinnati, Chargers, Miami, Philly, poor Goddard, Philly, Pittsburgh, and Washington. Ertz, and you wonder about some of those, and you can look at this plot, see who was stretching, and look at the improvers: Chargers, Houston, Washington, Jacksonville. Strange is back. Henry hadn't gone away. Bowers is there, and the bad news: Cleveland. I know Fannon's been doing good, but some of that is because there was a split with Njoku, and that took a little bit. Now, maybe it will change in the playoffs. Jets, New Orleans, Juwan Jennings, and poor Kittle, in and out. Arizona. Trey McBride hasn't been, has much opportunity in the last few weeks as the early in the season. Carolina, that kind of thing. And then here are the averages: 34, 29 and a half, 26. So there's a stair step. So suspicious. And again, the difference in a high team is, what is that? 8 snaps.
Wow.
Times 35. That's half a game. Yeah, I'd like to know that. And is it significant? Oh, yes. And it's all significant, Dennis. So it's
Very
all good, all significant. So this data, you can treat it just like the predictive in season. So it's strongly telling us chasing an opportunity is you want to pay attention to the highs and be concerned. Notice I didn't say not play tight ends, but just, especially in our tight end premium, I used to carry 2 tight ends in stream, and this would tell me I would be extra cautious about a low team tight end situation. Not saying he won't catch a touchdown pass, that's fluky, but you're rewarded for lots of activity, and having lower snaps is not getting lots of activity.
No, and here's one that really should be startling to people, because Pittsburgh has been running multiple tight end sets. Yet if you look where they are overall,
They're
when
average.
it comes to snaps, they're very average, which tells me they're using 2 and sometimes 3 and sometimes 4 tight ends on the field at the same time, and they're still
Average.
not moving the needle. So when I look at that, it tells me to be very, very concerned.
If you're trying to horse in
Pittsburgh.
Freiermuth as a streamer, be very cautious.
Would hate that. And then, other teams, it makes sense why they are up there in the chart, because New England also does a lot of 2 tight end sets. But when it comes to distribution of targets, it really leans heavy to Hunter Henry. You have a pass catching and a blocking tight end job descriptions that are very well distributed there. But again, fascinating data that
Yeah.
will be a very interesting thing to look at for, hey, what team do I lean into, especially for a best ball late tight end? Well, I want to lean into a tight end where they're on the field.
Yeah. Wide receivers, here are the highs and the lows. Chicago, Cincinnati, Dallas, Minnesota. I know people are, but we're not tracking points.
No.
Giants and the Jets were in the first 7. The bad news, Baltimore. Look at that. Here's Baltimore again. Boy, Lamar. Kansas City, boy, they've had some turbulent times. I know it's gotten better with Rice back, but Dennis, they've only had one green.
Yes,
I
that
would
makes
have
sense.
hoped if Rice
Yeah.
really turned the trick, we would have had more.
We're not seeing multiple tight end or multiple wide receiver sets. We're seeing 2 wide receivers is a big deal. Like
Yeah,
that's an aggressive passing down. They're seeing a lot of 3 tight end sets as well. It's been
wide
crazy
receiver.
with
Yeah.
Kansas City that they're not getting the high end number of snaps like they usually do either.
In Miami, poor Waddle, Dennis.
So it's the
I
whole
think he's
Waddle.
being buried in some of
It's
this.
yeah, it's
New
only the Waddle
England,
show. Yeah,
I mean, recently, but there've been Butte, you had what, Diggs,
Diggs.
and some of the other ones have stepped up. But what's happened is most of the season, it's been a lot of negatives. So
Yeah,
they've been spreading it out. It hadn't helped.
and
Pittsburgh,
and see, they're running. New England's really interesting because they're running a lot of 2 tight end sets, but they're also running 7 lineman sets, and the linemen, even though they're eligible, do
yeah,
not show up as tight ends in the
no, they
in the
won't.
stats. They show up as linemen. So there's a situation where they're just not putting a lot of wide receivers on the field. It's almost like they're rotating Diggs and
In
Butte on
Pittsburgh
some plays.
and Seattle, JSN is the show. So poor Shaheed is probably getting underutilized. I know he got a little pop, but still, overall, him moving from New Orleans where he was getting, look at the greens in New Orleans, with Shaheed gone,
Yep, yep.
still getting activity.
And why Valet has been a
He
play.
stepped up.
Yeah,
So
very interesting.
Shaheed people may be down on him a little too much, Dennis. They need to forget.
Yes.
They forget where he left and where he ended up. So it allows us to formulate questions. This is what this does,
I love
folks.
it. Love it.
Versus just guess. Well, I saw this last week, so therefore nothing. This is the season. This is the depth of samples and using stats. Here's the patterns. I forgot to color these red if I publish this. Here's the changes. Good news. You can see Rice has come back, but it hadn't helped enough, Dennis. Look.
Right.
Cincinnati's perked up with Burrow back. Seattle, they've improved, but JSN is not enough to run that. Detroit, Baltimore has improved. Baltimore was so bad, any kind of improvement would. In Arizona, here's the bad news: the Jets, yeah, they lost their guy. Cleveland never had their guy. Minnesota, boy, poor Jefferson.
And that offense is just going downhill. So there's less
Carolina's
snaps overall.
had issues. Ted, Jacksonville's had a lot, but not as much as you think. And because they have a nice tight end activity. They have a high tight end and a lower WR. And the Chargers, there's a lot of, but we don't know who the dominant Charger wide receiver is. It Quentin? Is it McConkey? I mean, it's just Keenan Allen. I mean, it's been crazy this season.
That's a sign that they're running less 3 wide receiver sets in the second half of the season, which that's showing up as glaringly, in that data.
Average 37, 34, 28 8, 29. So again, we're talking seven
Wow.
times. Yeah, that's 49 snaps from high to low. Looks suspicious. Is it? Yes. And yes. So once
Very
again,
interesting.
we have in season predictability, Dennis, that can probably in trading teams, dynasty, tie breaking, streaming this next year. I'm going to give us, the halfway report that we can keep referring to and maybe start, helping us out. Maybe even 6 weeks in, starting
Oh,
to get a
yeah.
little taste of that.
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
even 5, try to jump some of the data here a little bit.
And again, I'm very curious to see 2024
Yep.
and how that data compares to 25.
Yeah, year to year.
Yeah, is year
And
to
then
year
player.
predictive. Yeah.
So Dennis, some questions I have in a high wide receiver team. What's the distribution of targets?
Oh, yes.
You see,
Yes.
is the
Yes.
WR1 closer to WR2s versus the
Yes.
low, which is all about a one and that's it? In other words, is there a difference here in the extremes? So even a favorable matchup in a low situation, can they take advantage of that in a WR2 for the team? Is that even worth your time anytime, even in a
Yes.
favorable situation?
Yeah. And I would say, in my opinion, there are only about 5 WR2 types
Right.
preseason that I ever trust in
Yeah.
drafting. But you're right. Maybe the data tells us that as great of a player as Devonta Smith is,
Right.
the low volume combined with him being second on the totem pole,
Right.
maybe that's enough to look the other way next year. That's intriguing.
Well, it presents us with a starting point to investigate, folks. And if you're paying for data elsewhere, what are they using? You know, it's, yeah. If they haven't run their metrics through, and if they're trying to sell you a black box, right? Well, just trust us. Yeah, I would rather show you what we're trying to do, because it's not as the data knife and your analysis is not as sharp as you want to wish it was. There's, range of outcomes is real, but at
Yes.
least we have some place to start. And I argue that if you don't have that, I don't know how you can start slicing and dicing here, Dennis.
And here's my initial takeaway from all this data
Yeah.
is that it's another risk factor, and that the if you're in red a significant number of times, and I'm not even sure what that number is, but maybe 4 weeks out of 14, I would consider almost a
Yeah, I
third.
don't know if you look at the whole season, how many
Yeah,
low 20%. I don't know what that means. And again, I can figure those teams out and we could investigate at the player level.
yeah, and what I'm looking at with that is when you think in the terms of range of outcome, and people go, well, yeah, everybody's got a range of outcome. Yes, but the range of outcome for players is more extreme in certain circumstances and less extreme in others. And there are players that I know, if I take touchdowns out of it for a running back, wide receiver, tight end, there are players that I will confidently say that their gap is 6 to 8 points. That's where they are. 80% of their outcomes are going to fall in that 6 to 8 points minus the touchdowns. Touchdowns are very difficult to predict. Now, if I'm looking at a high scoring game with a player that I've got in a very tight box around 6 to 8 points, I'm going to be more likely to play that 6 to 8 point guy in a 52 point over under than I am in a 38 point over under.
Right.
Because his odds of scoring a touchdown are probably greater. And then there are other players where, and we have this discussion all the time setting lineups, and you'll ask me, where do you have him?
Yep.
And I've got him 3 to 12. And that's without a touchdown. Okay. 3 to 12 without a touchdown. I'm saying that in PPR, 3 is his floor, 12 is his ceiling before you add in any touchdowns. That is a very, very tough player to play many weeks because there's just too much uncertainty. A 9-point gap in a range of outcome minus touchdowns is really scary. And I think this data is another one of those red flags that lengthens that gap from the floor to the ceiling. It doesn't do anything necessarily to the ceiling, but it lengthens out that floor. Because if you're not on the field, you're not getting opportunities. You have a lower floor. And in certain circumstances, that is scary. If I've got a 3 to 12 point player, and then I had bad weather on top of that, and I had a tough defense on top of that, I'm probably avoiding that player. I know he could go off and have a 100-yard game and really screw me, but he's more likely to be under 50 yards and screw me to the opposite side. But this data, I think, Professor, just gives us another level of confidence when we're trying to make those high-low forecasts. And if you're not doing a high-low forecast, I'm not sure how that you're looking at fantasy football in a realistic way. I always try to think non-touchdowns, where will this guy be? Just on yardage and catches. If you got a guy who's getting consistently 8 targets, that means he's consistently going to be over 5 catches. That's 5 points right there. And a catch we know is worth about 1.5 points at minimum, right?
And you could do per snap too.
Per snap, exactly. So I know if I get 5 catches, the worst I'm doing with a running back, I'm getting 7.5 to 10 points.
Yep.
So those are the kinds of guys I want. Like, those are the kinds of guys that I'm feeling really good about versus the guy that gets 3 to 5 targets. What the hell do you do with that guy? Like, if he only gets 3 targets and he only converts 2 of those, that's 3.5 points. That's pretty low versus that guy that's that 7-8 target guy. So this data sets us up for that volume discussion, which then sets us up for the scoring discussion. Fascinating data, Professor, and I can't wait to see more.
Yeah, and we'll have more on off season here. Well, let's shut this down, and we'll have a start our real podcast here. Let me shut this down.